Everywhere I go, we have been seeing young people get involved in ways that we have not seen in a generation. We were in, when we were caucusing in Iowa, when we were organizing ourselves for that first contest, we kept on seeing young people come to our various rallies and town hall meetings and events, and I would tell reporters, something's different this time. I'm telling you, young people are going to come out. And they said, they always say young people are going to get involved. They never do. Young people are apathetic, or they're cynical, or they're this, or they're that. And on that day of that first Iowa caucus, I went to one of the precincts, one of the caucus sites, and I stood there and I just watched young people, college students and even high school students streaming in, one after one, and they'd come up and they'd shake my hand and they'd say, you know, I have never gotten involved before in my life, but there is something different this time. I feel like I've got a stake in it. I want to make America better, and it is inspiring me. You inspire me. So thank you, young people, for taking the time to be here. So it is good to be back in New Orleans. I am sorry that I'm a few days late for Mardi Gras, but I'm running for president, and they can't, the pictures that might come out of me at Mardi Gras might have doomed my chances. I might have never recovered. New Orleans is a city that has always shown America what is possible when we have the imagination to see the unseen and the determination to work for it. It's a city where slaves met in Congo Square to raise their voices in improbable joy. And a young man named Louis from back of town played the first tunes. It's a city where Jackson turned back the British, and a great port connected America's heartland to the Gulf. It's a city where races and religions and language got all mixed up and all together formed something entirely new, something different and something special. An imperfect place made more perfect through its promise for forgiveness. Now, in the wake of this quintessentially American city's greatest test, a test that President Cohen and President Francis and so many political leaders and community leaders and ordinary people were able to work through, we see the stirrings of a new day. This great university is well into another academic year, and driving up to the campus, it was astonishing to think that only a few years ago this site was 3 feet underwater. The St. Charles streetcar is rattling downtown. The Endymion Parade again winds through the streets of Mid-City. And as a Bears fan, this is hard to admit, but a son of a New Orleans, Eli Manning even won an improbable Super Bowl victory. We need a quarterback in Chicago. Is there another Manning brother somewhere? We've been having some problems. Most importantly, with each passing day, with each student who goes back to school, with each business that reopens its doors, with each worker who puts in a shift, New Orleanians are reclaiming their future and showing America just what can be done in this country when citizens lift up their communities. What we see in New Orleans is one of the central premises of my campaign, and that is change in America does not happen from the top down. It happens from the bottom up, because we are a hard-working, We are a hard-working and generous people, ready to sacrifice on behalf of future generations. And when we join together, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, young, old, rich, poor, when we understand that we are the United States of America, then there is nothing that we cannot do as a people. But of course, there's another side to this story, because we know that this city, a city that has always stood for what can be done in this country, has also become a symbol for what we could not do. To many Americans, the words New Orleans call up images of broken levees, water rushing through the streets, mothers holding babies up to avoid the flood, and worse, the memory of a moment when America's government failed its citizens. Because when the people of New Orleans and the Gulf Coast extended their hand for help, help was not there. When people looked up from the rooftops, for too long they saw an empty sky. When the winds blew and the floodwaters came, we learned that for all of our wealth and our power, something wasn't right with America. We can talk about what happened for a few days in 2005, and we should. We can talk about levees that couldn't hold, about a FEMA that seemed not just incompetent, but paralyzed and powerless, about a president who only saw the people from the window of an airplane instead of down here on the ground trying to provide comfort and aid. In fact, that was a metaphor for this presidency. Sometimes people ask me, why is it that you attract such big crowds? And I say, well, you know, people are ready for change. They understand this extraordinary moment. Hopefully, occasionally my words can inspire, but part of it has to do with the fact that when folks go into the polling place in November to select the next president of the United States, they know that no matter what else happens, the name George W. Bush will not be on the ballot. And they're happy about that. The name of my cousin, Dick Cheney, will not be on the ballot. That was really embarrassing when that news came out. And when they do these genealogical surveys, you hope that you're related to somebody cool. You know, like Dr. Francis or, you know, Willie Mays but Dick Cheney, that's a letdown. Anyway, we can talk about a trust that was broken. The promise that our government will be prepared, will protect us, and will respond in a catastrophe. But we also know the broken promises did not start when a storm hit, and they did not end there. When President Bush came down to Jackson Square 2 weeks after the storm, the setting was spectacular, and his promises soaring. We will do what it takes, he said. We will take as long as it takes to help citizens rebuild their communities and their lives. But over 2 years later, those words have been caught in a tangle of half measures, half-hearted leadership, and red tape. Dr. Cohen described it aptly while we were talking outside. He said, it is a tale of two cities. A tale of two cities. Yes, parts of New Orleans are coming back to life. But we also know that over 25,000 families are still living in small trailers, that thousands of homes sit empty and condemned, and that schools and hospitals and firehouses and police stations remain shuttered. We know that even though the streetcars run, there are fewer passengers. That even though the parades sound their joyful noise, there is too much violence in the shadows. To confront these challenges, we have to understand that Katrina may have battered the levees, but it also exposed silent storms that have ravaged parts of this city and our country for far too long. The storms of poverty and joblessness, inequality and injustice. Those are the storms that swirled before Katrina hit. When I was down in Houston visiting evacuees a few days after Katrina, I met a woman in the Reliance Center who had long known these storms in her life. She told me, and I quote, "We had nothing before the hurricane. Now we got less than nothing." We had nothing before the hurricane. Now we got less than nothing. I think about her sometimes. I think about how America left her behind before the storm. I wonder where she is today. America failed that woman long before that failure showed up on our television screens. And we failed her again during Katrina. And tragically, we are failing her for a third time, and that needs to change. And that's one of the reasons I am running for President of the United States of America. It is time for us to restore our trust with her. It's time for America to rebuild trust with the people of New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. When I am president, I will start by restoring that most basic trust, that your government will do what it takes to keep you safe. The words "never again," spoken so often in those weeks after Katrina, must not fade to a whisper. The Army Corps of Engineers has rebuilt the levees that were most damaged by the storm, but funding has sometimes stalled, and New Orleans remains unprotected. We can't gamble every hurricane season. And that's why when I am president, we will finish building a system of levees that can withstand a 100-year storm by 2011, with the goal of expanding that protection to fend against a Category 5 storm. Enough talk. Let's get it done when I'm president of the United States of America. We also have to restore nature's barriers, the wetlands, the marshes, the barrier islands that can take the first blows and protect the people of the Gulf Coast. If catastrophe comes, the American people must be able to call on a competent government. When I am president, the days of dysfunction and cronyism in Washington will be over. No more Browning. No more heads of the Arabian Horses Association in charge of FEMA. The director of FEMA will report to me. He or she will have the highest qualifications in emergency management. And I won't just tell you that I'll insulate that office from politics. I'll guarantee it by giving my FEMA director a fixed term, just like the director of the Federal Reserve, so that they will outlast the time that I'm in office. I don't want FEMA to be thinking for 1 minute about the politics of a crisis. I want FEMA to do its job, which is protecting the American people, not protecting a president's political future. That's a promise I'll make when I'm president of the United States of America. As soon as we take office, my FEMA director will work with emergency management officials in all 50 states to create a national response plan, because we need to know before a disaster comes who will be in charge and how the federal, state, and local governments will work together to respond. But putting up defenses is not enough. It's not sufficient, because renewing trust with the people of New Orleans is not just about stronger levees and pumping systems, it's about people. So many of us live a life that is ordered with comforts we can count on. Somewhere we know there are people who don't have a house, though, with a sturdy roof, who have nowhere to go when they can't make rent, who don't have a car to drive or another city to go to when a storm is coming, who can't get care when they're sick, don't get an education that would give them a chance to achieve their dreams. We know that there are so many fellow Americans who are crying out for help, and we don't listen as a government, and sometimes we as citizens don't listen. We decide that those children who aren't learning, those are somebody else's children, not our children. We decide those folks in the Ninth Ward who still haven't gotten anything back after the storm, that that's somebody else's problem. Too often we lose our sense of common destiny, that understanding that we are all tied together, that when a woman has less than nothing in this country, that makes us all poor. And that is why the second thing we need to do is to make sure that Reconstruction is making a real difference in people's lives. Across this city, we see the evidence that George Bush's promises were empty. It's not acceptable that federal money is not reaching communities that need it, or that Louisiana officials have filled out millions of forms just to get Reconstruction funds. When I am president, the Federal Rebuilding Coordinator will report directly to me, and we will ensure that resources show results. It's time to cut the red tape so that the federal government is a partner, not an opponent, in getting things done here in New Orleans and here in the Gulf Coast. Instead of giving no-bid contracts to companies headed by the president's former campaign manager, we will make sure that rebuilding benefits the local economy. I have worked across the aisle in the Senate to crack down on no-bid contracts and to make sure that emergency contracting is only done immediately after an emergency. When I am president, if there is a job that can be done by a New Orleans resident, the contract will go to a resident of New Orleans. And we'll provide tax incentives to businesses that choose to set up shop in the hardest hit areas. Instead of letting families languish in trailers, we will ensure that every displaced resident can return to a home. Today, tens of thousands of homeowners could end up without assistance because of funding shortfalls, and that is unacceptable. We must work with Louisiana to make the Road Home program more efficient. It's got to work more effectively. We should set a goal to approve every application for road home assistance within 2 months. Not 6 months, not 18 months, 2 months. That's how long it should take. And we need to increase affordable rental property so that we can bring down the cost of renting a home. Instead of shuttered hospitals and provider shortages, we will help the Gulf region rebuild a healthcare system that serves all of its residents. We'll provide incentives like loan forgiveness to bring more doctors and nurses to New Orleans. And we'll build new hospitals, including a new medical center downtown and a state-of-the-art veterans hospital that can serve the veterans who have served us so bravely in our foreign wars. Instead of unsafe streets and shocking crimes, we will help rebuild New Orleans' criminal justice system. We'll start a new Cops for Katrina program to put more resources into community policing so that heroic officers, men and women like Nicola Cotton, who gave her life serving the city she loved, will have more support than they're getting right now. We've got to make it easier on our police officers to do their jobs in this city, for the DAs to do their job in this city, for the prosecutors and judges to do their job in this city. We will launch a regional effort that brings together federal, state, and local resources to combat crime and drugs across the Gulf Coast. The children of New Orleans are America's children. And we cannot stand by while they see a future filled with violence or poverty or hopelessness. Our true measure of success must be ensuring that the children of New Orleans and the Gulf Coast can dream the same dreams as every child in America. And that is why the third part of our effort to rebuild trust must be providing a world-class education to every student from the day they are born till the day they graduate from college. Every student. Over 2 years after Katrina, too many schools are still closed. Kids are still going to classes in makeshift buildings and trailers. Class sizes run as large as 40 children for each teacher. That is not acceptable. It's time for FEMA to speed up payments of $58 million that Congress recently allocated for school repairs. It's time to invest in education so that New Orleans has the first-class school system that it has needed for so long. And that starts with the person standing in front of the classroom. Many heroic, high-quality teachers have returned to New Orleans, but we need more. That's why I've called for $250 million to bring quality teachers back to the Gulf region. Any teacher or principal who commits to come here for 3 years should receive an annual bonus, and those who teach in subject areas where we face shortages, such as math and science, should receive an additional bonus. In New Orleans, but also all across the country, we need to stop talking about how great teachers are and start rewarding them for their greatness with higher salaries and more support in the classroom. They shouldn't have to dig into their own pockets for school supplies if they are teaching our children. We also need to recruit new teachers by helping them pay for a college education. I've already said, for every student in America, not just teachers, but every student, $4,000 tuition credit. Every student, every year, so you're not loaded up with $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 worth of debt when you graduate. But understand this, young people. You are going to have to give something in return. You're actually going to participate in community service or national service, work in an underserved school here in New Orleans, work in a veterans home, join the Peace Corps. We will invest in you. You will invest in America. Together, we will march arm in arm to create a better country and a better future. We need to expand mentor programs to pair experienced teachers with new recruits We need to help them move up the career ladder and gain new skills. We can't accept an education policy where we pass a law called No Child Left Behind and then leave the money behind. And we can't just have our teachers teaching to a test, because we want our students learning art and music and science and innovation and poetry and history. We want them to have a full-fledged education so they can function as citizens in the United States of America. If there is any city in the world that shows us the value of culture and creativity, it is right here in New Orleans. Our commitment to education can't stop with a high school diploma. I fought in the Senate for post-Katrina support for Xavier, Southern, and Dillard. And I put forward a loan forgiveness program to make it easier for students to come back to Tulane and colleges and universities across the Gulf region. It's time to make a college education affordable, not just in New Orleans, but for all Americans. Now, let me just say one last thing about education, though. You know, I want to put more money into education. But one of the things that all of us here in New Orleans and all across the country have to understand is that it is not just the job of the teacher to educate. It is not just the failure of the government that we have to acknowledge. All of us are going to have to change our attitudes, and parents especially have to understand that you have a job too to make sure your children are taking your education seriously. And students, you have a responsibility. This is not summer camp. We're not here for fun. You are here to improve yourselves and then improve America. We need to improve our four-year institutions, but we also have to tap the tremendous resources of community colleges. When I am president, we will reward schools that graduate more students, and we'll help our schools determine what skills are needed to help local industry so that graduates are well prepared to lift up the economy and to rebuild their communities so that they are getting trained for the jobs that actually exist in the future. That has to be part of our mission of our institutions. The trust we seek is not a one-way street. It's going to take folks working together and doing their part. The government cannot rebuild the Gulf Coast for the people of the Gulf Coast. The government can only rebuild the Gulf Coast with the people of this region. All of this will cost money. The federal government has already promised the resources, but they need to be spent more efficiently and more wisely. When I am president, we will target funds to programs that make a difference and make sure that resources meet the needs of the people. And that means working closely with state and local officials and asking that they keep up their end of the bargain. I promise you that when I'm in the White House, I will commit myself every day to keeping up Washington's end of the bargain. This will be a priority of my presidency. And I will make it clear to members of my administration that responsibilities don't end in places like the Ninth Ward. They begin in places like the Ninth Ward. And I will ask the people of this city to do their part. Because together we can do more than rebuild a city. We can create a model for America, for how we prepare for disasters, for how we fight poverty, for how we put our kids on a pathway to success. If we do this, then we can once again make New Orleans the city that stands for what we can do in America, not a symbol for what we can't do. If we do this, then we can begin to turn the page on the invisible barriers, the silent storms that have ravaged this city and this country, the old divisions of black and white, of rich and poor. It's time to leave that to yesterday. It's time to choose tomorrow. You know, here at Tulane, your degree will open many doors. I hope that many of you will choose to stay here in New Orleans and to make this work your own. Because, young people, you are ultimately the change that this city seeks. You can be this city's tomorrow. You can help close those divisions that have plagued us for so long. And by doing so, you can help heal this nation. What better place to begin this work than New Orleans? Here in the city that gave us jazz, we know that even the most painful note can be followed by joy. Here in this city, we know that if we look hard enough, we can imagine the unseen. Homes filled with families, businesses putting people back to work, schools extending opportunity, the next verse in the American song. That's what's possible if we can trust each other. If we have the imagination to see the unseen and the determination to work for it. You know, I talk about hope a lot in my campaign, and I talk about hope out of necessity because the odds of me standing here are very low. I was born to a teenage mother. My father left when I was 2, so I was raised by that single mom and my grandparents. And they couldn't give me wealth or fame. They could give me love, they gave me an education, and they gave me hope. And so I talk about hope a lot during the course of this campaign. I have hope on my signs. I gave a speech in Boston at the convention about hope. I wrote a book called The Audacity of Hope. And I notice as this campaign has proceeded and we've done better than people expected, and you know, when you do well, suddenly folks start coming after you. They like you when you're down 20 points, but when you start actually challenging the status quo, then suddenly the claws come out. So I've noticed I've been criticized. Oh, he talks about hope all the time. He's so naive. You know, he's a hope monger. The implication is that if you talk about hope, that you must somehow have your head in the clouds. You must be engaging in wishful thinking, that you must be passive somehow and not really be willing to work and fight for what you believe in, that you're a talker and not a doer. And I have to explain to people that's not what hope is. Hope is not blind optimism. Hope is not ignorance of the challenges that stand in your way. I know how hard it will be to rebuild New Orleans to the point of where it was before the storm hit. I know it's going to be hard to bring back all those people who have scattered across the country. I know that it will not be easy to reduce poverty or violence, to get our young people on the right track. I know because I fought in the streets of Chicago as a community organizer in poor neighborhoods, just like the poor neighborhoods in New Orleans. I fought in the courts as a civil rights attorney on behalf of those who had been denied opportunity on the job or denied access to the ballot box. I have fought in the legislature, and sometimes I've won and good legislation has passed, but sometimes I've lost, and I've seen good legislation die because good intentions were not enough. They weren't fortified by political will or political power. I've seen how a country can be in the grips of fear and have its judgment clouded and get misled into a war that should have never been authorized and should have never been waged. So I know New Orleans, how hard change can be. I know how difficult it can be to overcome. But I also know this, that nothing worthwhile in this country has ever happened except somebody somewhere was willing to hope. That's how this country was founded, by a group of patriots declaring independence against a mighty British Empire. Nobody gave them a chance. That is how slaves and abolitionists resisted a wicked system, and how a new president charted a new course to ensure this nation would not remain half slave and half free. That is how the greatest generation overcame fascism and overcame a Great Depression. That is how women won the right to vote. That is how workers won the right to organize. That is how young people traveled south to march and to sit in and to go to jail, and some were beaten and some died for freedom's cause. That's what hope is, Tulane. That's what hope is. Imagining and then fighting for, then struggling for what didn't seem possible before. There is a moment in the life of every generation when that spirit has to come through. When we cast aside the doubt and the fear and the cynicism and the divisiveness and the bigotry, and we join hands and we decide that we are going to embrace the hard task of remaking a city and remaking a nation, block by block, county by county, parish by parish, state by state. This is our moment. This is our time. And if you will stand with me, and if you will join with me, and if you vote on Saturday, if you insist that the next generation deserves the same chance as somebody gave us, if you are willing to fight to keep that dream and hope alive for those who still hunger for justice and still thirst for opportunity, if you're not willing to settle for what the cynics tell you have to accept, but are willing to reach for what you know in your gut is possible, then not only will we win an election, but we will transform the country and we will transform this world. Thank you very much, Tulane. God bless you.